What is going on, everybody? Jamie Shaw here on the Absolute Basketball Experience. And on today's episode, we have George Mason head coach Dave Paulsen. Very excited for you guys to listen to his story, to his climb as a successful D3 coach, jumping into the D1 ranks, and then the story of finding himself, the success that he's had, and then looking forward to the George Mason program as to what we have on the roster now, looking forward into next year, and how they're handling this pandemic and all that kind of stuff. It's a very good, very in-depth talk here. We get to peel back a lot of layers, get to know Dave as a coach and what the program has looking forward. But before we get into it, we ask that you please go ahead and subscribe to this channel. If you would, please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, give it the like button. And then also let us know who your favorite George Mason player is of all time. Very excited to hear from you guys in the comments section. Favorite George Mason player is of all time. And if you enjoyed what Dave had to say here, please feel free to share this across your platforms as well. Very excited for people to hear Coach Paulsen and all that kind of stuff. But without further ado, here is Coach Dave Paulsen on the Absolute Basketball Experience with Jamie Shaw. Thank you guys very much. You played for 4 years in college at Williams College. What type of player were you?
I was short, and I made up for it by being slow, Jamie. I was not a good player. Obviously I was a head coach in waiting. And so I think my head coach thought, well, if you're going to be a head coach and you used to sit on the bench, then probably a good place for you to spend your college career as well. But I was fortunate, I played I use that term loosely, for Harry Sheehy, who was one of the most successful Division III head coaches in the history of the game at Williams. And he became really my mentor when I went into coaching, and then became the athletic director at Williams, hired me back as a head coach. Now he's a director of athletics at Dartmouth. And when you talk about leadership, he was as good a leader. He was as good a teacher in terms of building a team as any have been around. And obviously the game has changed tremendously since I was in college, but the principles stay the same. And much of what I do and who I am as a coach is because of those 4 years with Harry Sheehy.
And you played your 4 years. And I believe it said that you were you were an assistant or a volunteer assistant at Williams for a year, and then you went on to Michigan as a GA.
Yeah. So my first job right out of high school was out of college was a small private high school in Englewood, New Jersey, Dwight Englewood School. So I was I was a head coach of the varsity team, and I coached 8th and 9th grade history. And it actually really enjoyed the teaching part of it, but coaching was unequivocally my passion. And so I went back to Williams, a volunteer assistant coach. I was a part-time sports information director. I interviewed for the admissions office. I was a JV baseball coach at the local high school. Stayed in a room at assistant football coach's house for $100 a month. And it was fun. It was great. It was total immersion into it. And I had grown up in Wisconsin, went to school in Massachusetts. And every summer I would kind of work my way back home, working camps. And so I worked the Michigan camps. And Steve Fisher at the time was the assistant to Bill Frieder as a head coach at Michigan. And so he hired me. I worked camps for him. He liked the job I did. And then in 1989, when I was an assistant at Williams, Steve Fisher's the interim head coach at Michigan. And again, you're probably too young to know this story, but Bill Frieder takes a job at Arizona State. Bo Schembechler says, we're going to have a Michigan man coaching the Michigan team. Makes Steve Fisher the interim head coach with no chance for him to be the head coach at Michigan, but they go on a 6-game magical run, win the national championship. Coach Fisher becomes a coach at Michigan. He hires me as his grad assistant.
So coming off of that national championship run that they had, you come in with that team. You still have the likes of Rumil Robinson, Terry Mills, Loy Vaught on that team. And then also Steve Fisher, who's arguably one of the best coaches in college, the recruiting-wise, just all-encompassing. What did you learn from Fisher during that time, and what was it like being around those type of players?
Well, the thing I learned about Coach Fisher, number one of the best coaches, but a way, way, way better person. He's as genuine and sincere man as I've been around. And, so that was he was a great role model for me. Wasn't full of himself, and if you ran into him on the street, say, I had Dave Paulsen on my podcast, he would stop and sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and tell his director of operations, tell you, said, Coach Fisher, you're late for your next meeting. He's just a genuine, sincere person. And then, he coached to his personality. So he had goofy mannerisms, and he was like an old school teacher in some way, and the guys would make fun of him, but they loved him. The guys on the team, they loved him because they knew he was sincere and they knew he was genuine. And, he didn't get too high, he didn't get too low. And I think if you're going to have a long career in coaching, that has to be kind of your mantra.
And then after that, you go on to Cleveland State with Coach Mike Boyd to be an assistant coach there. What would you say is the biggest difference from being a GA to actually getting on the court as a coach at the Division I level?
Yeah, it was, again, I was really, really fortunate, to be able to go back to Williams as assistant, to maneuver my way into the grad assistant position at Michigan. And then Mike Boyd was the top assistant at Cleveland State, and he took me with him as his top assistant. So I was 25, and I was, a top assistant in a good mid-major program. And it was kind of baptism and fire. It's very easy as a grad assistant. You got all these great ideas, and now you're out there doing it. But it was great because I got to recruit, relentlessly, to really help Mike kind of build the program and institute our offensive and defensive system, scout, and it was just, for back a lot, it was my master's degree in coaching in terms of this worked great, this didn't work great. This was back in the day. One of the interesting things was you could live scout back then. Division I has long since gone away from live scouting. And your access to film was way less than what it is now. Now you can get every possession of every game played anywhere in the country or the world. There, you're lucky if you had 2 or 3 VHS tapes. So going to do live scout was fun, and sitting courtside and watching coaches coach. But one of the things that you miss just by watching film that you can get when you go live scout is how coaches interact with their players, how they manage timeouts, things like that. So it was just a tremendous learning and immersion experience for me.
And then in 1994, you get the opportunity to become the head coach at St. Lawrence College. What all went into that decision to kind of move down the chair and take over your own program at the D3 level?
So to me, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I just decided I want to be a head coach. And, I wanted to be responsible for my own. Now, to some degree, you're putting your whole livelihood in the hands of 18 to 22-year-old males. So nobody's ever really able to control their destiny. But I wanted to have my success, for me to only blame myself if we didn't have success, or if we did have success. And I wanted to be a place where I could really have an impact with kids. And I played Division III basketball at a really good school, St. Lawrence, a really good school in upstate New York. And it was the chance, again, to really immerse myself in the game and make mistakes, in teaching zone offense or making a game decision to play. And there's 250 people there and nobody really knows, so you can make your mistakes in anonymity and you can learn in a slightly less pressurized environment. I think one of the things, some people who've been assistants for so long and they get a Division I head coaching job and they've never been a head coach, they're making their mistakes now with tremendous scrutiny and tremendous visibility. And that's hard. You're never ready to be a parent until you're a parent. You're never ready to be a spouse until you're a spouse. And you're never really ready to be a head coach until you actually do it. And I think the people who grow the most are the ones who are able to make mistakes, learn from them, and continually adapt and adjust. And sometimes, at the smaller college level, you have the luxury of making mistakes and being able to overcome them.
And then over your final 2 years at St. Lawrence, you were 40-13 with 2 NCAA D3 appearances, still under the age of 35 at that point. What did you learn the most over your 3 seasons there?
Well, I think, again, you learn everywhere you go how you go about building a program. And I think I've been at a lot of different schools as a head coach, and I think one of the things you have to really understand is the school and the institution and what works at that school. Um, where is your niche in recruiting? Where can you get people? Who fits? Who you're going to win recruiting battles with? Who you're not going to win recruiting battles with? And then also what works in your conference. What can be your strengths vis-a-vis your opponents in that league, and then build a program, build a system that's going to work there. And so I think I've played a lot of different ways at different schools I've been at. That's been fun, but it's also, you're kind of always reinventing yourself.
So you go from St. Lawrence to Lemoyne, and then from Lemoyne back to your alma mater, Williams. I guess over 14 years into your head coaching career, you've amassed 202 wins, 6 NCAA tournaments, and a championship. After that 07-08 season, you're 44, 45 years old. Where's your mind at this point in time as a head coach in your career?
So, and the chance to go to Williams was my alma mater. And I remember at the time, a guy goes, "You're going from D2 to D3." I'm like, Williams is the Duke of D3. I'm like, we can win a national championship. And we're fortunate. Harry Shee had taken Williams to the Final Four in 97 and 98. And then in 2000, he becomes the AD. Mm-hmm. And I went there in 2000 thinking I was going to be there forever. And I would have been happy being there forever. Great school. They give you tenure as a coach, so I would have still be the coach there. And a place where you can get one or two potential Division I players a year who choose the mix of academics and athletics. So we won a national championship in 2003. We lose in the championship game 2004. We have a group that's freshman laden that we think will go and I think that the guys I left went to 3 Final Fours after I left. So I'm like, hey, we could win multiple championships. Small community, loved it. But by the same token, I was open if there was an opportunity that fit for me philosophically to challenge myself at a higher level. And Bucknell, kind of a search firm reached out to say, hey, would you be interested in the Bucknell job? And, great school academically. So very similar to Williams. You're recruiting maybe from the same areas, the same AU programs. You're just recruiting maybe, the one guy better, the little bit better player on that particular team. Although not always. Duncan Robinson was a pretty good player who started off at Williams. So that was, as I got further along the process, I'm like, yeah, this fits with my values and philosophy, and went to Bucknell and had just a phenomenal 7 years there, and we were able to have quite a good deal of success as well.
So I'd like to kind of sit down in that little transition. By all accounts, you had an insanely successful career at the D3 level, and up to this point, even in the 14 years. Looking back on it, what was the biggest learning curve that you had jumping from Williams and that success to Bucknell, D3 to D1 levels?
So the biggest learning curve for me, again, you're trying to figure out what works at that level. I think probably for me in Division III, I always had, a 22 or 23-year-old assistant coach who would make $4,000. Like Williams, back then, especially in the whole NESCAC conference, they didn't want to be in an athletic arms race, and so you really didn't pay your assistant coaches, and you'd help them get a job substitute teaching or working at the local youth center, reffing soccer games and basketball games, and found a cheap, duplex where everyone could live for $150 a month or something like that, and make friends with the people in the dining hall and sneak the guys in the back door so they could eat. And then to have a full-time professional staff. Mm-hmm. And so in Division III, I was used to doing everything, doing all the scouts, presenting the scouts, gassing up the vans, ordering the food. So how do you delegate without abdicating?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is managing a staff where I've still got my hands on everything, but yet give up some control and make yourself better. So I think that was probably the single biggest and one of the more rewarding adjustments is how do you get better by having a bigger staff, learn from them, take the best, but still set the tone and have your fingerprints over everything. So that was probably one. And then I think the other thing, I think the difference is, in Division III versus Division I, there's great coaches in Division III, without a doubt. But all those coaches tend to have maybe one assistant coach. So the level of specificity and scouting and detail isn't the same. And so, in Division III, you would be forced to get to your second option to score. And I think in Division I, you're forced to get your third or fourth option. So I just think there's nuances. And I remember I never felt like I was overmatched coaching in a game
Mm-hmm.
until my first year at Bucknell going against Ralph Willard at Holy Cross. And, the expression, he was playing chess and I was playing checkers. I was like, wow, this, and we would guard something a certain way. And we're like, okay, we got them stopped. They come out of a timeout and they would bait how we'd guard something and they'd run a counter. They'd get a layup or a wide open three. And I remember watching the film afterwards, like, wow, do I have a lot to learn? And so, and there were so many good coaches. And I think, again, it challenged me to become better as a coach.
And even in your 7 years at Bucknell, you won 134 total games. You won 70% of your Patriot League games. You made it to a postseason tournament 4 of your last 5 years. Kind of expanding upon that, how do you feel like you grew the most during your time at Bucknell?
Well, uh, we played different ways. So one of the things that we did is we were playing the way I played at Williams. And I remember this like it was yesterday. We ran more of a kind of purer motion, screening away, cutting, passing motion. And I remember playing a game on the road at Dartmouth where we put up like 42 points and losing and driving home in the bus through a blizzard, watching the game. And like, that was a good shot. That was a good shot. And getting mad at my team for their execution. And Aaron Kelly, who was my assistant at the time and it was with me at George Mason, now as a head coach at Catholic, he said, maybe it's not a good shot for our guys, coach. And I briefly fired him. And then, the next day I'm like, he was right.
Yeah.
And we switched and went to much more of a ball screen oriented motion offense and had to change and adapt and had great success with that. And then, and fortunately I had really good players. Mike Moscalis still plays for Oklahoma City Thunder and really good players. And then my last year at Bucknell, the ball screen offense wasn't as good for our guys. And we had guys who could really shoot off stagger screens. And we literally changed during semester exams and changed our offensive approach and ended up winning the regular season title, losing in the conference tournament and went to the NIT that year. So we played like 3 different offensive styles. And I learned how to kind of tweak what we did to what I thought would best serve our team.
So, and kind of expanding on that a little bit, during your time at Bucknell, you really did become known for your motion style offense. While it kind of tweaked it and varied it a little bit, what type of basic principles did you stay on with that motion style offense that stayed true the entire time?
Well, at Bucknell, I mean, we really, again, motion, I mean, back in the day when I was coming up, it was Bob Knight and Gene Cady, what I would call quote unquote pure motion, not as many rules, a lot more off ball screens. You don't see it that much anymore anywhere. Purdue to some degree, maybe Kansas State a little bit with Bruce Weber, but you don't see it as much. And because of that, kids coming up through high school, reading off ball screens, we're not as proficient, whereas everyone plays off ball screens more. So basically what we try to do is, okay, well, what are the best principles of motion offense? Ball reversals from one side to the other side of the floor, making the defense work, creating a good shot, having great spacing, and reading the defense. How do they guard things? And so we took those principles and then tried to adapt them, to a ball screen motion offense. And then that has adapted and changed as the game has changed. Even when I got to Bucknell, everyone played with, 3 guards and two more inside oriented players. And whether it was the skill level of players or the analytics movement or both, you see much more 4 out, 1 in now. So again, always kind of changing and evolving.
And then your time at Bucknell, 08 to 15, you recruited 4 of Bucknell's 10 all-time leading scorers with Muscala, Foulon, Ayers, and Thomas, and 3 of the top 10 assist guys, Brown, Casper, and Coleman. How did you go about recruiting to your niche while at Bucknell?
Well, and Bucknell's got it is a great school, and it's got a beautiful campus and a great tradition and beautiful facilities, and you have a niche. Like we felt at Bucknell, you could find one kid a year who would go with that combination of academics and small school atmosphere with a winning tradition. You could always get one player a year who would turn down higher, quote unquote, higher level scholarship offers. So we really had a niche there, and we could really get skilled, smart guys. We weren't going to be exceptionally athletic. So we knew what we were looking for. And I think the other thing we learned was pretty quickly, I think the next best thing to yes in recruiting is figuring out your no early on so you can move on to the next guy. And so I think what we did pretty well there was figure out this guy, what we're about. I think it can resonate with him and his family and his coaches. And the next phone call, I don't think this guy understands what we're about. Forget it. So you recruited nationally, so our expanse was bigger, but our pool was smaller because of the academic component, because of the fit component. And I think it allowed us to become really efficient. And we, by the end, like the last class I recruited didn't have a chance to coach. A kid named Kimball McKenzie had a great career at Bucknell. Kid Nate Sistine had a great career and then finished up his 5th year at Kentucky. Didn't have a chance to coach those guys. The group I coached for 1 year, Nana Fowler, Zach Thomas, Stephen Brown, all. Sorry, forgot to put Do Not Disturb on my computer. So all those guys, they really just, they fit for sure. So I think that was a key. It's like figuring out your niche very, very early on.